They were professionals. The rule was simple. Find a broken-down truck after midnight, take what's inside, let the desert handle the rest. It had worked every time. El Primero knocked on the driver's door. Silence. He knocked again. The door opened from the inside. The man didn't raise his hands, didn't reach for his phone. He just looked at the four of them, calm, cold, almost bored. Then he looked at his watch. Then he spoke. "How many of you are there right now?" That was the last question those four men ever heard. Classified asset designation, November 7. Active service, 1987 to 2009. Unit, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, Delta. Deployments, redacted. Confirmed operational kills, redacted. Status, officially retired. Actual status, unknown. His name, the name this video will use, is Garrett. Not his real name. His real name appears nowhere in public record. It lives in 3 classified DoD databases, 2 of which no longer exist, and one so heavily compartmentalized that fewer than 11 people in the United States government have ever accessed it. What we know about Garrett comes from the edges, the fragments that survived the redaction, the people who served alongside him and spoke, carefully, quietly, always off the record, about what kind of man he was. Born in eastern Tennessee, 1961, enlisted at 19, by 23, quietly flagged by a Delta Force recruiter as someone worth watching. By 26, he was operational. By 30, he had participated in actions across 3 countries that the United States government still officially denies any involvement in. He was not the loudest man in any room, not the biggest. Former colleagues describe him with a consistency that borders on eerie. Quiet, they say. Still. The kind of still that makes other people uncomfortable without knowing exactly why. One former team member, speaking anonymously in 2021 in a conversation that was never published but was shared directly with this channel, said simply, "Garrett never wasted anything. Not a word, not a step, not a bullet. Everything he did was the minimum required to achieve the objective, nothing more." He retired in 2009, 22 years of service. He took a property in southern Arizona, 40 acres of scrubland, a modest house, a well, and a view of the mountains that he once described as the only thing in the world I've never had to be suspicious of. He drove into Sonora occasionally to buy supplies from a small market in a border town that had not yet been fully swallowed by the cartel economy. He knew the owner, a man named Ernesto, for 3 years. They spoke in Garrett's careful, precise Spanish. They drank coffee. They talked about the mountains, about nothing, about the kind of quiet that men share when they are simply glad to be alive in a peaceful place. And then, in the spring of 2013, Ernesto's 17-year-old son did not come home. His name was Miguel. Miguel had been driving a produce truck for his father's supplier. Legitimate job, legitimate cargo, legitimate route. He had driven that same road 11 times before without incident, but that route crossed through a stretch of highway that Los Frontera, a mid-level operation aligned with the Sinaloa structure, had recently claimed as tribute territory. They stopped the truck, took the cargo, then took Miguel. The reason has never been fully established. He was not a threat, not a witness to anything meaningful, not carrying anything worth taking beyond the produce. The working theory in the DEA's internal files, the ones that were never made public, is that Los Fronteras' local commander, a man known as El Arquitecto, had recently issued an order to his crews: leave a message on the highway. Not for rivals, for the towns. For every father, every mother, every teenager who drove that road thinking it still belonged to ordinary people. Miguel was the message. His body was found 3 weeks later in an irrigation ditch 7 miles outside of town. The official determination was drowning. The irrigation ditch contained 8 inches of water. Ernesto filed a report with the municipal police. The officer who took his statement was on Los Fronteras' payroll. The report was never entered into the system. He went to the federal police. The office had been compromised 2 years earlier. His case was assigned a number, placed in a folder, placed in a cabinet that had not been opened in 11 months. He hired a lawyer. The lawyer received a phone call the following evening. The lawyer returned Ernesto's retainer fee the next morning and did not answer any subsequent calls. Garrett heard about Miguel from the woman who ran the pharmacy next door to Ernesto's shop. He drove to Ernesto's house that evening. He sat with the older man for 2 hours. He did not say much. He never said much. When he left, he shook Ernesto's hand and held it a moment longer than necessary. That night, Garrett drove back to his property. He walked to the storage room at the back of the house, reinforced door, no windows, and opened a chest he had not opened in 4 years. For 16 days after Miguel's death, Garrett watched. This is important to understand about how he operated. He did not move on emotion. He gathered information the way he had gathered it for 22 years, systematically, patiently, without the noise that amateurs bring to the process. He mapped Los Fronteras' local supply routes, documented their checkpoint locations, their patrol patterns, the shift changes, the specific 2-hour window between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. when their presence on the northern highway dropped to a single vehicle. He identified the hillside relay antenna that Los Fronteras used to maintain communication between their field units and El Arquitecto's regional command center in the city, 3 miles from the highway, exposed, unguarded. He visited that hillside twice during his observation period, moving at night, leaving no trace. He left something there on the second visit. He would use it later. During those same 16 days, he also made 3 attempts through official channels. He contacted a DEA field supervisor he had known since the early 2000s, a man he had worked alongside, a man who owed him, professionally and personally, more than either would ever put in writing. He laid out everything: the route, the organization's structure, the specific individuals responsible for Miguel's death. The DEA supervisor called back 48 hours later. His voice was flat, careful, the voice of a man reading from a script he'd been handed by someone above him. "There's an ongoing investigation. I can't discuss specifics. If you have information, there's a tip line." Garrett hung up. He reached out to a Customs and Border Protection officer he trusted, one of the few in the sector he knew to be genuinely clean. The officer listened, understood, and told him with real regret that the case would need to go through the Mexican federal system, which had been formally notified and had formally declined to prioritize it. The third call was to a State Department liaison who, in a previous life, had coordinated directly with Garrett's unit on operations that neither of them could name. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. The liaison said, "I hear you. I genuinely hear you, but I cannot help you with this. Not now." Not now. Garrett sat with those 2 words for a long time. Then he went back to the storage room. This time, he didn't just look at the chest. He started packing. The inventory, reconstructed from a partial manifest in the declassified report, was as follows: 1 suppressed Heckler & Koch NK-23, subsonic 45 ACP ammunition, 1 fixed-blade SOCP dagger, 3rd-generation PVS-14 night vision monoculars, 4 compact blocks of demolition material, a medical kit, 2 sets of dark, non-reflective clothing, and 1 laminated card, the size of a business card, that agents would later find tucked behind the truck's sun visor. No name, no identifying information, just a series of numbers, the specific radio frequencies used by Las Fronteras communication network in that corridor. He had obtained those frequencies during his 16 days of observation. Garrett loaded the gear into the Ford F-250, a vehicle purchased for cash from a private seller 6 weeks earlier, never registered. He drove south into Sonora as the sun was going down, the mountains turning dark orange and then dark red and then black ahead of him. He was not angry. Anger is a resource. It burns fuel. It narrows perception. It introduces variables that a clean operational mind cannot afford. What he felt, driving south toward the highway where Miguel had made his last drive, was something closer to arithmetic. A problem existed. The problem had a solution. He was the solution. The math was simple. It had always been simple. At 2:09 a.m., Garrett pulled the F-250 off the highway and activated the hazard lights. He had chosen the location precisely. It sat within the 2-hour gap in Las Fronteras' northern patrol coverage, 4 miles from the nearest checkpoint, 3 separate egress routes into the desert, 2 of which no vehicle could follow. He clipped the PVS-14 monocular to its head mount and flipped it into position. From this moment, the night belonged to him. Everyone else was blind. He settled in and waited. At 2:32 a.m., headlights appeared to the south. 2 vehicles. His intelligence had suggested 1. He processed this without alarm, filed it, adjusted. 2 vehicles meant a 5th man, likely staying with the rear vehicle as a scout and extraction driver. It also meant the timing window on the antenna needed to move up. If the rear man heard nothing in 4 minutes, he would either call in or approach. Garrett pressed the button on the remote trigger in his left hand. 3 miles away on the hillside, the relay antenna ceased to exist. In Las Fronteras Regional Command Center, every northern highway unit went to static simultaneously. The duty operator began running diagnostic checks. Standard protocol would take approximately 12 minutes before they escalated to a physical response. 12 minutes was more than enough. The 2 vehicles stopped 30 meters behind the truck. 4 men got out of the lead vehicle. They fanned out automatically, the muscle memory of men who had done this too many times. El Primero on the approach, 2 on the flanks, 1 covering the rear. The 5th man stayed in the 2nd vehicle, engine idling, driver's seat, watching. El Primero came to the driver's door. He knocked. He knocked again. Garrett opened it from the inside. He asked his question, counted the answer on El Primero's face. 4 men outside, 1 in the vehicle. Confirmed. Then he moved. What the declassified report describes next spans 3 clinical pages of military documentation. This is the condensed version, because the report's language strips the context away, and context is everything. Garrett's first priority was the 5th man in the rear vehicle, not because he was the most dangerous, because he was the only one with an open line of escape and an engine already running. Garrett had positioned the truck's body between himself and the rear vehicle during the approach. He knew exactly where that sight line was broken and where it wasn't. He used it. The suppressed Mk-23 produces a sound roughly equivalent to a staple gun. In the open desert, at 30 meters, it is effectively silent to anyone not standing directly beside it. El Primero was standing directly beside it. El Primero was the first variable resolved. He went down without a sound. The 2 flank men registered movement, not sound, approximately 1 second later. One turned toward the truck. The other turned toward his partner on the far flank, confused by the absence of any noise cue that should have explained what he was seeing. That moment of confusion, That half-second of a man turning the wrong direction, trying to make sense of wrong information, is something Garrett had trained to create and exploit. The PVS-14 turned the darkness into a green-lit tactical map. Garrett moved along the truck's blind side, using the vehicle as cover the way a surgeon uses a curtain, not to hide, but to control the geometry of what the other person can and cannot see. The second man went down at close range before he resolved his confusion. The third, the far flank, had now identified the source of movement and was raising his weapon. He was not slow. He was not undertrained. Under any normal circumstances, against any normal opponent, he would have been a serious problem. But he was raising his weapon against a man who was already inside the distance where a weapon becomes a disadvantage. Garrett closed the gap in 2 steps. The SOCP dagger is 7 inches of fixed steel designed for exactly this range. The engagement lasted less than 3 seconds. That left the fourth man, rear coverage, positioned behind the truck, who had by now understood that something was catastrophically wrong, but had not yet pinpointed where Garrett was. He made a decision that was professionally correct and fatally mistaken. He moved toward the second vehicle to reach the fifth man and re-establish communication. He called out a name as he moved. Garrett let him get 8 steps. Then the second C4 block, the one he had placed beneath the rear vehicle's chassis on his approach during the 30-second window when all 4 men were focused on the truck door, detonated. Not a massive explosion, shaped, directional, the minimum yield required to remove the vehicle and the fifth man from the equation simultaneously. The fourth man stopped moving, not from the blast, from the shock of it. 1 full second of absolute stillness. 1 second was enough. The desert went quiet. Garrett stood in the darkness for a moment, the PVS-14 painting everything in cold green light. He conducted a field assessment, systematic, unhurried, the way he had been trained to close an operational site. Verify, recover, sanitize, exit. He recovered the phones from the men on the ground. He recovered the radio equipment from the lead vehicle, Los Fronteras secondary frequency, the one that would remain operational after the relay antenna went down. He confirmed the laminated frequency card was tucked behind the sun visor. He checked his watch, 2:51 a.m. He had been on site for 42 minutes. He walked north, off the highway, into the desert. He did not look back. But he was not finished, not even close. The federal police arrived at the highway site at 7:22 a.m., summoned by a passing truck driver who spotted the scene from the road. The incident report filed that day described a probable inter-cartel territorial dispute. Evidence cited the presence of Los Frontera-affiliated individuals among the deceased, the absence of witnesses, and the general pattern of violence in the region. The destroyed relay antenna was separately logged by a communications technician as equipment failure, probable lightning strike, despite no recorded storm activity in the area that night. The remains of the rear vehicle were described as the result of an electrical fire consistent with a fuel system malfunction. Every anomaly was explained. Every explanation was wrong, and everyone who filed those reports knew it. The DEA supervisor who received the anonymous package was quietly transferred to a desk position in Washington 8 months later. He retired in 2017. He has never spoken publicly about Case File 2013-SN-666. The file itself is classified at a level that requires special authorization to access. 3 congressional requests to review it have been denied on national security grounds. In the border town where Ernesto still runs his shop, there is no official record of any of this, no commemorative plaque, no acknowledgement. The municipal police log from those months mentions nothing unusual. But in the kitchens and back rooms of that town, there is a story about a night in 2013 when the highway went quiet. about 4 men who drove out to rob a broken-down truck and never came back, about a fire visible from the road that no one officially explained, and about a man, no name, no face, no origin, who had been drinking coffee in Ernesto's shop every few weeks for 3 years, and who, after the autumn of 2013, was never seen there again. They call him El que esperaba, the one who was waiting. Ernesto does not speak about this to journalists or strangers, but the woman from the pharmacy next door says that once, some time after Miguel died, she saw Ernesto standing in his doorway in the evening, looking down the road toward the desert. He was not crying, he was just standing there. And his face, she said, wore an expression she had never seen on a man who had lost everything. Something that looked almost like peace. Garrett's current location is unknown. His classification remains active in 2 federal databases. Whether any official investigation into the events of Operation Silent Ledger was ever opened is itself classified. What is not classified, what was never classified, because no government ever found a way to make it disappear, is what happened to Los Frontera after that autumn. They never recovered. Make of that what you will. So here is the question I want to leave you with. Garrett broke the law. Technically, unambiguously, he broke it. 4 men are dead by his hand. A vehicle was destroyed. Evidence was stolen. He operated on foreign soil without authorization, without oversight, without a single person in any government knowing what he was doing. But Miguel is also dead, 17 years old, a produce truck, a road he had every right to drive. The law failed Miguel before Garrett ever opened that chest. So you tell me, was Garrett a criminal? Or was he the only honest answer to a system that had already decided Miguel's life wasn't worth protecting? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story hit the way I think it did, subscribe, hit the bell, because the next file is already on the table, and what's in it makes tonight look like a warm-up. The archive doesn't close. Most people, having done what Garrett did that night, would have considered the account settled, walked away, disappeared. Garrett did not consider the account settled, because the 4 men on the Sonora highway were not the decision-makers, they were instruments. The decision that killed Miguel, the order to leave a message on the highway, had come from El Arquitecto. And El Arquitecto was still in the city, behind 3 layers of armed security, running an organization as if nothing had happened. Over the next 9 days, using the recovered phones and the secondary radio frequency, Garrett listened. He did not speak, did not intercept. He simply listened, the way he had listened to enemy communications in 3 countries whose names he could not say publicly, mapping the pattern, identifying the rhythm, learning the schedule. El Arquitecto was a creature of routine. This is common among men who believe themselves untouchable. Routine feels like stability when you are never afraid. He met with his financial coordinator every Tuesday at a specific restaurant in the city. He used the same 3-vehicle convoy for every movement. His security detail rotated on a fixed schedule. Fixed schedules are gifts. On the 10th day, Garrett drove into the city. He did not go near El Arquitecto. Instead, he went to the financial coordinator's office, a legitimate import business, 3 floors above a hardware store that had been laundering Los Fronteras' revenue for 7 years. He went at 11 p.m. when the building was empty. He was inside for 22 minutes. He did not take money. He did not destroy equipment. He took documents, physical ledgers, a hard drive, a specific folder that the financial coordinator kept in a locked drawer that Garrett opened in approximately 40 seconds. What was in those documents has never been fully disclosed publicly. What is documented is that 11 days later, an anonymous package arrived at the DEA's regional field office. The DEA supervisor, who had told Garrett there's a tip line, opened that package and sat with its contents for a long time before picking up his phone. The call he made was not to a tip line. Within 6 weeks, 3 of Los Fronteras' primary financial routes were frozen. Within 4 months, 2 of El Arquitecto's lieutenants had been arrested on charges that required evidence no one could explain the provenance of. Within 8 months, El Arquitecto himself was in federal custody. He is currently serving a 43-year sentence. He has never, in any interview or deposition, mentioned the night the relay antenna went dark. He has never mentioned 4 men on the highway. He has never indicated that he knows what or who began the unraveling of everything he built. Either he does not know, or he knows and understands that saying so would require explaining things he cannot explain.